So many questions come to mind with a title like The Art of Teaching Mindfulness. You know, if you're a teacher, if there are teachers in the room, what's your role? What's the role to avoid? When you're teaching, what do you pay attention to? Is that different from being a student? Are there terrible errors to commit? What about the role of levity or presence in being a teacher? For us non-teachers, many of whom want to introduce partners or kids or friends to the practice, how do we do that well or do that very badly? And Jon's been a teacher. He's also taught many teachers and helped them become teachers, and he's also had good teachers of his own. And so I'm very excited and curious to hear from Jon and to learn about this. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And just to say, Eric is a profound force on this planet in his own right. And I didn't make up this title. I mean, they just kind of give me assignments, and I do them. So the first thing to say is that none of us are really capable of teaching mindfulness. Okay, so it's a very high bar, and I think it's important actually, and this goes against the grain of, hello there. This goes. I'm going to keep my back to you most of the time, but feel the broadcast coming through the body, as Richard Heckler said. You know, it's like, I feel you back there. Whatever we're calling this collective engagement, mindfulness or heartfulness or compassion or wisdom or an upgrade of wisdom. I'd take wisdom 1.0, you know, at this point on the planet. There's a paradox associated with it, and that's that it's infinitely available and close right now. And also simply the hardest work in the world for us human beings to get in touch with. Why? Because we're so in the habit of getting in our own way. And getting out of our own ways is a lot more non-trivial than it should be, in some sense. If you saw this beautiful film that Brother David Steindl-Rast did, on gratitude, it's like, it's not saying that there's anything more that you need to do. It's rather that we need to sort of get out of our own way and let the beauty that is us intersect with the beauty that is the entire world, and how it manifests in the form of you and you and you and you and anybody who would come into your room as a teacher. Or maybe, and I use the word room really advisedly, because in a sense, the universe is the room. Awareness is the room. And if you just attend to where the periphery or the boundary or the circumference of your own awareness is, I don't think you're going to find it. For all the talk of the body and, being embodied, one of the interesting properties of being human is that awareness is boundless. And the universe is also boundless. And we're a product not just of evolution, but of the evolution of the whole thing. So when it comes to teaching mindfulness, there's some fundamental questions, and I really appreciate, Eric, how you frame some of them. I'm not sure I'll touch on all of those different elements of it, but the spirit of it should really come through. And that is, first of all, really none of us are competent. And it's the hardest work in the world, at the same time that it's no problem at all. But we need to sort of go from a place where we're in our thinking and we're downloading a curriculum into other people that we've pre-thought and prefabricated and then doing it on people. And then it becomes a performance of a certain kind, which is how we do almost everything that we do, and for good reason. I mean, you don't get a driver's license without learning how to actually drive the car. But getting a driver's license doesn't immunize you from having accidents. You have to be there inside the car, and aware and not looking behind you. So we have to ask a deep question about motivation, because if we're choosing to do something that's actually the hardest work in the world for us ourselves to do, never mind invite someone else to do, we have to do it with a huge degree of humility and a huge degree of understanding that what we're really inviting is a kind of realization, a making real in our own moment-to-moment existence unfolding, that we're already okay, that we're already whole, which is the root meaning of the word health and healing and wholeness and even H-O-L-Y, holy. We're already complete. And probably none of us think that most of the time. We always think, well, he doesn't know me, it's like, and we start to catalog all the things that are wrong with us. And I like to say, you're perfect exactly as you are, including all the imperfections that your legalistic lawyer-like mind is going to now say, well, he doesn't know me because, and here's the laundry list of things that I need to improve upon before I can really. So sometimes we have to really ask the motivation. What is your motivation if you want to teach mindfulness? How many of you do teach mindfulness in one way or another? Fantastic. The reason I'm saying this is not sort of to say, no, we can't do this, but to say, no, we can't do this because the bar is so high to actually live what it is that you're teaching, as opposed to having it come out of your head and out of your thinking mind. And no one can do that regulation for you, including your, whoever you learned it from. So that transmission energy, you're right, I studied with a lot of different people and I watched them very carefully. And some of the people that I studied with, they were criminals. And I learned more maybe from the way they abused the privilege of being a teacher and of being a Dharma teacher. And they were basically unethical or dishonest in one way or another. I learned probably more from them than I learned from the great ones, who live it, because you see what not to do. And you see the cost of the betrayal of yourself, basically, and the deep wisdom that comes to us because we didn't make it up. I mean, and mindfulness, as you know, is like just part of the elemental inheritance of being human. But there is a long, very ancient and venerable tradition of practice within different traditions. Primarily, the sort of clearest articulation of it is in the Buddhist tradition. Okay. That said, it doesn't mean that any of you have to be Buddhists in order to teach mindfulness. And just to make it clear, I am not a Buddhist, okay, although people project onto me that I must be. But I prefer to simply identify, to the degree that I want to identify at all, with human. Okay? And not an ism and not a kind of, because they tend to create dualisms like us and them, Buddhists and the non-Buddhists, but Buddhism is about non-duality. So, and the Buddha, it could be argued, was himself not a Buddhist. He was an investigator. He was an experimentalist. He was a yogi. He was a lot of different things, and he brought all of these wisdom traditions together in a way that actually clarified it and then made the curriculum coextensive with life itself in the timeless moment we call now. So the first principle would be of teaching mindfulness is, are you living it? And I would say that that's the real practice, because otherwise there's a certain kind of artificial way, and I'm not knocking it because that's how we all begin. It's like, okay, now I'm going to become a meditator. And now I better be a good meditator. And so I'm going to strive to be whatever it is that I think of as the best way to do this. And that's all fantastic. But there's another element to this, and that is that if you're already whole and there's no improving on you, then actually, there's no separation between you and the Buddha, but you don't know everything that the Buddha knew. So that's where the humility comes in. And so how do you take what you could call the instrumental, what is required, to say, like sit in a posture that embodies dignity? Well, that's a nice, helpful way to, get people to settle. But you could do it lying down or standing on your head or standing on one leg for that matter. And at the same time, there's no place to go, nothing to do, nothing to attain, to quote the Heart Sutra. Okay? No place to go, nothing to do, nothing to attain. And the trouble with Americans, how many of you are from different countries, not America, not the U.S.? Well, lucky you. That's a joke. But in America, we're always trying to get someplace else. We're always trying to get to some better place. And I tell you, we've been here before. There's this kind of cyclical way in which everything rises and passes away. And it's not like greed, hatred, and delusion just emerged in our last election, for instance. No, it's been going on forever, prehistory. I mean, and you all know this. I mean, and what's not said, what the narrative isn't, and then it changes to the narrative that is, Whether it's the Me Too movement or there's the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's like, the women have always known, stuff that now is all in the front of the newspaper, but before it was like, truly oppressive in a certain kind of way, but in a way that didn't lead to clarity or waking up until now, and the same with the school shootings and everything else. But this, you can't talk about the school shootings apart from like the hangings in the South, for centuries, and the slavery and the genocide. What's that have to do with mindfulness? Only everything, because it has to do with awareness of the whole. Otherwise, you're in some little cubbyhole or kind of bubble is the popular term now, where you're in your own reality and now you're trying to get everybody else to be in your reality, which means you don't trust the larger whole. So you're already off in a certain way. So trying to teach mindfulness is very different from actually embodying it in your own life and then letting your life actually do the teaching. And then the actual guidance will come out of your own direct experience, and it won't be imitative. Okay? And it won't be prescriptive, and it won't be trying to teach people to get into some special mindful state. Okay? There's no mindful state. If you want to, it's not about attaining a particular something. It's about not getting caught in how much we are thinking all the time and then creating a reality based on thought, so that so your students, they're already aware. If you're teaching in schools, how many of you teach in the schools, K through 12, something like that? Okay, and more and more teachers are bringing mindfulness into the school system. And I don't think until recently, most of the school systems have been, it's coming from the superintendents or the parents. It's coming from the teachers because they can't teach in the classroom. I mean, because the kids are so stressed and they're coming to school with all sorts of issues and problems that used to be taken care of by family, and now it's not so much being taken care of entirely by the family. So the shorthand would be, how do you teach kids to tune their instrument of learning when they're coming into the classroom in the morning totally stressed out, and maybe having experienced violence or hunger already that morning, not even had breakfast. And then there's the whole thing with the school shootings. It's like, how many school shootings does it take to have you think that it could happen in our school this morning? And so a kind of very sort of big cloud hanging over a place that was supposed to be safe and sacrosanct, where the children could actually learn. So that's a lot that the teachers are carrying. So can you actually embody the sense that you're not trying to get the kids to be a special way, but to recognize that the way they already are is insanely special? It's also true for the breath. Let's just, for a moment, because, by the way, we haven't really dropped into silence, but I hope it's clear to you that this is itself part of the meditation practice. This conversation that we're having where you're actually listening and I'm actually speaking, it's as much practice as anything else. We're collectively dropping in to wakefulness, and then I'm pointing towards things that you already know, and what I'm trying to do is affirm them and reinforce the significance of you taking responsibility. If you hope to aspire to be a mindfulness teacher and really transmit the deep essence of this, that you have to live it 24/7 without the have to. Okay? That it's a love affair. It took me a long time. I've been having formal meditation practice now for over 50 years, and it took me 30 or 40 to actually realize that when I take my seat in the morning, it's a radical act of love. Just to stop, just to wake up, a little bit more than when we jump out of bed, which we're already zoning along on autopilot because we're late. Do you realize? We never have enough time. We're always behind. So taking your seat is a radical act of both sanity and love. And I use it metaphorically and literally. Taking your seat, yes. Sitting practice or in any embodied posture, very important. Silence, extremely important element of it. And when you see that in the K through 12 class of a whole bunch of kids sitting in silence and being the knowing of wakefulness, it's incredibly moving. And especially even, a lot of those kids may be on the spectrum in one way or another, or have ADD or ADHD. And I've witnessed classrooms in some of the most stressed public school systems in the country. It's like staggering to watch, to feel the kids be still and know what they're doing. And when you plant those seeds in childhood, you get a different kind of adult. Because they're exercising a certain kind of muscle, what Richard Heckler was talking about, sort of embodied practice. You have to practice. But you have to know what practice is, because otherwise you're rehearsing for some performance, and that's not what practice means in the meditative traditions. It means being fully present now. Because there's no performance, this is it. And it's not a performance. It's life unfolding. So if you can maintain that perspective of honesty and integrity and sort of your own inner ethic for not creating harm out of your own fear of not doing a good enough job, or not really being qualified, or not being Buddhist enough, or whatever your mind will produce, they'll say, like, I haven't sat enough long retreats. That's true. But then don't beat yourself up about it. Just go and sit the retreats and see that this is a lifetime's engagement. Okay? It's not like you have to get it all done the next year. And if you maintain that kind of honesty and integrity, even if you don't know everything that you think you know, you'll know enough. Because what your students will feel, whether they're kids or adults, will be your presence, your authenticity, your openness, your not knowing everything. Not knowing is so important. Awareness of what we know and is important. But the not knowing is always bigger than the knowing, and so the awareness is big enough to hold it all. And knowing what you know you don't know, that's like, really? It sounds weird, but it's like, that's weird. And then you see you're a unique embodiment of wisdom. Now, not 30 years from now. That's the challenge. And there's a certain kind of urgency, as I'm suggesting to it. So the world actually needs you to do what you want to do. I'm guessing because you came to this particular workshop that you care. Trust that. Trust that. Let life be your meditation teacher. Yes, there are all sorts of people and places to go where you can sort of really exercise that muscle more deeply and under high conditions of, retreat and focus and so forth. Fewer distractions. At least you'll think that until you get there, and then say, just because I'm on retreat doesn't mean I have left my head at home. No, and your head is carrying the entire universe, so it's like, oh my God, are you in there too? Just when I'm trying to have some rest or repose. And you don't need to shut it off. See, that's the biggest mistake that we make, is teaching people to shut off thinking, or that thinking is bad. It's beautiful. It's just that awareness is equally beautiful, and we never get any training in it. And we train in awareness by paying attention. Now, every teacher wants their students to pay attention. And, before the invention of the internet and the web, hardly any students were paying attention, even when they had notebooks and no iPhones and laptops. Now, people don't even come to class because they can just download it all from the... So there's a certain way in which the analog you needs to meet the analog them and make it interesting enough so that they'll actually want to come, attend class and love it. So that then it becomes infectious. It's a love affair, but it's not narcissistic. It's a love affair with life, with what the movie was pointing to, with the beauty of and the preciousness and the miracle of not just this day, but this day embraced in the embodiment that we call you, whoever you are. And that's the invitation. And then it's like, it's a conceit in a sense to think that we are practicing mindfulness. Once you get into it and begin to taste the beauty of dropping in that way, it's more like the practice is doing you. It's revealing to you how to get out of your own way, exactly what we were talking about at the beginning. And then there's no wrong, just as there's no one right way to practice. So how many of you would say that you have a regular, daily, or almost daily formal meditation practice to support what you're doing? Turn around. I want you to all look around, okay? Because it's like 80% of the hands. Raise them up high so we can really, whoa. This would not have happened even 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. The world is changing. And while none of us, in the sort of instrumental line, we say, well, really it should be the Dalai Lama who's doing all this. But the Dalai Lama, he has limited bandwidth, for God's sake. He needs help. And then you can, whoever your guru of the moment is, that let whoever is on the main stage do it. No, this has to be a kind of distributive engagement, the love affair on the part of all of us whose hearts beat, who care, who breathe, who are human, and who really care about more than just maximizing my own, whatever I think I need in order to be happy, because you've probably had the experience where as soon as you get what you think you need to be happy, you're not happy anymore because there's something else that you need to get. So there's no end to that kind of acquisitive mind. And it's the same for meditation. People get into meditation, they get acquisitive about stages of enlightenment. And you say, well, what is enlightenment? I don't know. Well, but you want it. That's what you want the most. And, it's like, well, why don't you try just being the awareness of not knowing? Then you're already here. And then, as the Heart Sutra says, no place to go, nothing to do, nothing to attain. And paradoxically, the next line in the Heart Sutra is, the Bodhisattva, you, attains anuttara anyak sambodhi, supreme perfect enlightenment. Okay? But it's not what you think. It's already the essence of who you are. The Buddhists would say Buddha nature. So can you see the Buddha nature in your students? Because you're there for that transmission. And however you got it, you are a conduit. And yet you shape it in your own beautiful, particular ways. And as I said, none of us really are, competent to do it. But when the house is on fire, you try to do what you can, and the house is definitely on fire. So I think first I'm going to ask Eric if you want to ask any more of those particular questions if I didn't cover them, because I like to have a lot of dialogue. And so if there's one egregious thing that I've left out in terms of the few questions that you asked.
Yeah, many.
That's what I thought.
I think I think one question that some people may have is, if you're not a teacher and you have a great experience with meditation, again, how to introduce it to people close to you, and maybe how not to introduce it to people close to you as you wanna share it.
Okay.
And
let's start with that.
Yeah.
Okay. My recommendation, and I'm a sort of tough guy when it comes to this kind of thing, is don't do that. Just live it. Be what it is that you want to teach, and let the rest take care of itself. I think that it's really important not to become a kind of proselytizer of mindfulness, or like, my children, you would really be, better off if you were more mindful. Yeah, and the kids, they're looking at you and they see the entire full-dimensional, three-dimensional, 360-degree, you're telling me how I should be, but you're not actually practicing it yourself. So the most important thing is be it, whatever the it is. The irony is, you already are it, but we keep forgetting because we're so self-distracting. And we're so preoccupied and lost in thought. So you don't even have to squelch the thinking, just be aware that you're lost, and all of a sudden the awareness not lost anymore. And here's a thumbnail thing that you can always use. Is your awareness, let's say, when you're depressed. Does anybody ever get depressed? When you are depressed, often it's for good reason. But you can ask yourself, is your awareness of your depression depressed? Check it out. Maybe you could live more in the awareness rather than in the depression, which is really a thought disorder of depressive rumination, where one thought takes you down, deeper than the other. Is your awareness of anxiety? Does anybody ever get stressed or anxious in this crowd? Okay, well, when you're anxious, can you hold your own anxiety and awareness with a degree of self-compassion? And ask yourself, investigate, look through the microscope or telescope. Is my awareness of my anxiety at all anxious? Can I feel the tension in my body? But the body is much more than simply the tension. And in the actual bringing of awareness to it, it can actually dispel, like touching a soap bubble. It goes poof. Again, it's a muscle. You exercise it, you work with, not against, the resistance of like not wanting to do it or not being able to remember in time, and then getting in your own way and then having to apologize. It's all practice. It's all practice. So that's what I would say. And it doesn't mean that you can't teach your kids to meditate, but it's far better to have them learn from somebody else at school rather than from you, because you're too attached to the outcome. Okay? They know it already, so it's like they're the real Zen masters in the house, not you. And if you actually let them be the teachers to a certain degree, then I think things will just go much more optimally. Another one? And then we've got 10 minutes, so I want to open it up. But
Yeah, there's a mic in the middle of the room. So if people have, for the people that do have
yeah, how are you going to
questions-
get to that mic? I don't know. But just shout out the questions.
Yeah, it's a small enough room. If people want to shout, stand up.
Yeah, please,
raise
go
a
ahead.
hand, shout out a question.
Hi, Jon. You started out by saying you are maybe more from the crooks than the criminals. I spend about, can people hear me?
John, you said that you've learned more from the crooks and the criminals.
I spent about 25, thank you. I spent about 25 years in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and 2 out of the 3 teachers I studied with closely have been credibly accused of quite severe sexual and financial misconduct.
Yep.
So it's heartbreaking, and it raises the question, which of these deep, profound teachings are valid for me and which are tainted? And in a way, they're all tainted because the people who taught me weren't sincere fully. But at the same time, there's all this wisdom and profound insights there. Do you have some advice for that?
Well, first I want to just resonate with the pain of it, because it is basically a betrayal. The proximal betrayal is that you, the student, or the people who put trust in the teachers, were betrayed, okay? The bigger thing is that the Dharma itself was being betrayed, okay? Because the cardinal principle is one of optimizing what the Buddhists would refer to as the wholesome and minimizing the unwholesome. And predatory behavior of any kind, however manipulative, however dressed up in spiritual clothing or anything like that, is really an act of violence, huge violence, which completely contradicts the Dharma. So I learned a long time ago, and thanks for sort of bringing up what I said about learning from some of the teachers who were like, as one of my Korean teachers said, a little no good, It's like I'm fairly disrespectful of the human beings, I have a big, don't know, but not of the Dharma. See, I've put the Dharma to the test in my own life, and I continue to do it, and it continues to be, sort of valid and valuable. So the shorthand is trust the teachings and put them to the test in the laboratory of your own life, and the teachers, don't venerate them or notice the impulse to venerate them and even investigate that. It's like, where does that come from in you? Okay, because everybody wants to be favored by the teacher and to be seen and met. And you see, and a teacher, ethical teacher, will reflect that back to the student, and it would be like really grist for the mill, and you'd grow by recognizing how much you want to be recognized by the other. Why? Because in some sense you're not recognizing yourself. Okay? So this is, again, it's perfect in the sense because we can't control the whole universe. Even the spiritual teachers, it's not like your teachers invented that. It's been going on forever, and yet there's also this current of deep, authentic, selfless transmission. And it's in the teachings themselves. And the teachings themselves are not in some museum. They are in a kind of ongoing, flourishing laboratory. So they're changing over time. But the question is, while the teachings themselves may change in form, the Dharma, the wisdom element, is in some sense timeless. And we have to find a way to be in that, sort of paradoxical situation of, again, in time and growing and out of time and completely whole already. And then your beauty shines through. It really is a love affair, but it's not narcissistic or more for me. And thank you for asking that question. It's like really important. Yeah. Here, pass.
Thank you, Jon, for your authenticity. how do you operationalize the practice of mindfulness? In my life, I practice an instrument, I practice at sports, and I've been giving a great deal of thought in the practice of mindfulness as letting go of the idea that I'm actually practicing anything and just being in my life, so that mindfulness isn't something that I do in a practice, but it's who I am.
Yeah, you just said it. You answered your own question, now, which we often do. Now just believe it, or test it, because life is actually the practice. And yet it's important to have thoughts about the practice because, we're continually stretching the envelope, we're evolving. But, those of us here who are like, I'm going to be on the stage this afternoon with my old friend Stephen Mitchell, and we called it Old Dharma Brothers, okay? Underscore the old part, Before you know it, you're going to be over 70. At least that was my experience. You'll still feel like you're 20 or 5 or something like that, but you won't be. And people will begin to sort of treat you differently. Seriously. From the inside, it's like you've been practicing your whole life, and really it's like, am I there yet? And it's really interesting to ask that question once it's over, because, in the process, you always think that there's a destination, but then at a certain point, you begin to realize that there is no there. It's like, am I here? And there's no then and now. So that way, you can save yourself decades by just getting out of your own way and trusting that the world is your Dharma teacher. And the more you're really listening, the more you don't have to actually be concerned about the deepening. The deepening is going to do you. And it will do you in unique ways because of what you love. You might be drawn to this or you might be drawn to that. I mean, one of my particular sort of teachers, is a collection of people who died over 1,500 years ago, the Tang Dynasty Chan masters. And their teaching is available, and it's phenomenal. But people draw on the larger Dharma tradition in many, many different ways. Yoga is an incredibly powerful practice. Yoga is a deep and very big and important part of MBSR. Why? It's a different door. There are an infinite number of doors, same room. Okay? Do a first approximation, same room. And the world really is requiring you to do this ethically, responsibly, and lovingly by letting go of doing anything. And I know it sounds weird, but in my experience, it's trustable, trustworthy. Does that answer your question? Okay, we have time for one or two more. One more. Yeah. Let's get that microphone over here.
Thank you so much. I have a question in regards of how can we abide in awareness and still being embodied in a human form? And when it comes to teachings or teaching the Dharma, for example, thinking about if you teach meditation, and the common meditation is, as everybody knows, thoughts are arriving and dissolving, like emotions like this clouds in front of the sky.
Yes.
But with this, and it's a beautiful way to start practicing meditation, and at the same time, I realize, I noticed that it reinforces the concept of duality. So within my life, and also when I'm teaching or talking about Dharma, I'm still in the linguistic of duality, which helps, but it reinforces the concept of duality. So
I want to be really clear that I understand how what you're pointing to reinforces the concept of that. You were talking about sky-like mind. Where's the duality?
So when you, for example, in meditation, when you there's this common meditation, you are the witness of your thoughts arising and dissolving things with emotions.
Dead already.
Right?
Why? What was the word that? Witness. Witness. There's the dualism. You think of yourself as witnessing your thoughts, you're dead. Give up. Only that moment's over, so your new breath in, you're alive again. But
Yeah,
this is very common that people talk, and the trouble with the witness is then it immediately puts you as the subject, and then there's an object out there, and that's the dualism. Now, is that true on a relative level? Yes, of course. I mean, it's not like we have to, abandon the word witness in the English language, but if you turn it into, which the English language can do really beautifully, and since you mentioned language and how that's related to this, turn it into witnessing, then there's no you.
Well, I
witnessing.
found that, when it comes to this point and, to all these teachings, then you basically can always come to the point is there's no you and there's only the action, so it's only experiencing and there's no experiencer and the experience.
Yeah.
So actually, all Dharma teachings I found is you can come back always to the, ultimate and absolute, which is awareness itself. Everything
Yes.
arises out of awareness.
Okay, and that's non-dual.
Yeah. But I found it's really difficult to communicate it and use the language, and I'm not even talking about teaching, but even...
Yeah, I hear it. I mean, you can hear it in the conversation, that it's a big... Why? Because we're going into thinking. And as soon as we go into thinking, no amount of conversation is going to actually illuminate. So the important thing is to kind of invite conditions where when that kind of selfing arises, it is recognized by the awareness function that doesn't have your name and is not a witness. It's more like it's a function, like breathing. It's like, okay, I'm going to close it with this. I mean, just to say, okay, how many of you are breathing? Raise your hands. Okay. Now, the fact is, you're not breathing. Whoever you think you are. If it were up to you to be breathing, you would have all died a long time ago because you got distracted, get a text, whoops, dead. So, I like to say this. Whoever you think you are, whoever that you is that's breathing conventionally, you're not allowed anywhere near the brainstem, the phrenic nerve, and the diaphragm that's doing this. You're being ventilated. You're being breathed. So the more you recognize that, then it's just what Stendelross was talking about. It's like life is doing you more than you're doing life. And the question of who you are, that's the most fundamental meditation practice of all. Who am I? What am I? And then not knowing, okay? Just not filling it up with a dime store answer, following it up with a dime, but just who am I? And maybe listening, okay? Awareness, sing, feeling, knowing, not knowing, but not merely in thought. So I want to thank you. It's way too short, but really nice to have you all here. And thanks to Eric for facilitating this.